Welcome to Bursting Through, the storytelling movement where love, compassion, and empathy take center stage. I'm Steve Peterson. Our conversations will shine light on real stories of allyship, the moments where people choose connection over division, courage over silence, and love over fear. Right now, we are joined by Dr. Kate Kedley. Dr. Kedley is an associate professor in the Department of Critical Literacy, Technology, and Multilingual Education at Rowan University. Kate received a PhD from the University of Iowa, an MA from Northern Arizona University, and a BA from the University of Northern Iowa. Kate also holds graduate certificates in professional writing and in gender, women's, and sexuality studies. Dr. Kedley's research centers around critical literacy and education, public engagement, LGBTQ and young adult literature, language education, and social and educational movements in Honduras.
Thank you
Kate,
for having me.
welcome. Thank you for taking time to talk.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah, I'm really super excited to learn from you. And I know we have tons to learn from you. So we're just going to jump right into it and see where the
Sounds great.
conversation takes
Yeah,
us.
I'm excited. Okay.
All right. So, as I mentioned in the bio, you're an associate professor of critical literacy, technology, and multilingual education at Rowan University in New Jersey. Can you tell us about the journey that brought you there? And are there specific experiences or people that influenced your career path?
Yeah, sure. So I am from rural Iowa and I'm like a ninth generation Iowan. Everybody in my family is either farmers or teachers. And so I chose the path. My dad always said, I don't think you're going to be a farmer. So, you know, so I was an English language arts teacher. And I also taught PE and driver's ed for a while. My first teaching job was in Arizona, which I had never really been west of,
Wow. Yeah.
further west than Iowa, when I took that job. And I taught there, and then I taught in Central America and Honduras for a while, and then I came back to Iowa and lived there for about a decade, and I worked on my PhD. And then I got the job at Rowan University, and I'm very happy working in New Jersey. I live in Philadelphia, and doing research, but also staying so close to K-12 classrooms and LGBTQ activism and social justice things like that.
Yeah. So, what, uh, what brought you to study Honduras? What was,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah.
So I had two little kids when I was teaching K-12 education, and anybody who's ever taught knows it is like a 24-hour day job. And I was coaching cross country and coaching track, and my kids were in the stroller as I'm with the kids at cross country and basketball and things like that with the students. And I remember thinking, and I wrote a whole dissertation saying that this was probably irresponsible. But I remember thinking like, God, there's got to be an easier way to like teach and be with kids, but live life. And someone had told me about international teaching, where you go to a different country and you teach. They pay for your housing, they pay for your flights, they pay for your cell phones, they pay for your transportation within the country. And I thought, I'm going to do that. So I just kind of random. I went to an international teaching career fair. I had offers from 4 or 5 different schools across the world, and I kind of randomly picked Honduras. Whether I'm not sure whether it's good or bad, but like I said, I wrote a whole study about critiquing it. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, because it's a long way from rural Iowa to
it is,
Honduras.
it is.
And as a fellow Iowan, it's like, and then I hear you about, uh, going to Arizona. Like my first job out of Iowa was actually Kansas City. That doesn't seem that far, but as a
It
rural
probably
Iowan,
was.
it really was. Right. Right.
For sure.
Well, that's all super fascinating. So, what I learned is as part of your work, you're called as an expert witness for LGBTQ Honduras seeking asylum, which is the illegal way to immigrate in the United States. So, can you tell us about the asylum process, your role in it, and why LGBTQ Honduran people seek asylum in the United States?
Sure. So asylum is a legal way of migration or immigration, and there's a number of different ways to do it. And of course, there's other ways that would get you paperwork, but they're all come with, as I'm sure everybody has heard, lots of money, and you need lawyers, and you need to pay different fees and things like that. So if you're applying for asylum, you're claiming that that you face danger in your home country, and it's a danger that is either caused by or ignored by the government. So, for example, you can't really just say, I dislike my life in in a certain country, country X, my neighbors are mean to me and I'm in danger. You have to have like the government is actually creating the danger or they're ignoring the danger. That's the first qualification. And the second qualification is you have to be part of a protected class. And so whether LGBTQ people are a protected class or not, or should be, is obviously up for debate more and more, sadly. I think it's been established that in a lot of places, being LGBTQ is a class of people that are discriminated at because of who they are as a member of that group. I have done some for women who are victims of intimate partner violence and stuff, where the lawyers are trying to make the case that that's a protected class. Of course, the opposing team, usually the Department of State for the United States, would say, "Well, that's not a class of people. They just had a bad husband, or they had a bad partner,
Right.
or things like that." So other classes might be if you're a journalist, an indigenous person, a political activist. So you have to meet those two requirements to get asylum. And if you want to apply for asylum, this is also in the news a lot. You can do it at a port of entry. So, for example, if you get off of an airplane or you come through the border through Canada or Mexico, you could just go up to someone and say, I'm claiming asylum. And legally, the Border Patrol has to offer you a chance to state your case, usually in front of a judge. Now, sometimes they look at someone and they say, like, well, what's your case? And they say what it is. And the ICE people or the Border Patrol will say, nope, we're sending you back immediately. But technically, they should be able to state their case. Sometimes that takes a long time, years and years and years, and they're given an ankle monitor or they're given a parole that they can, report back and forth to an immigration officer. Other times they're, put in detention. So depending on on that kind of process, if someone is in detention, you want the court case to come a little bit quicker, because otherwise they're just sitting in a detention center and they're not able to make money and send to their family or have any type of freedom at all. If they have an ankle monitor, sometimes they can secure a work permit, or if they don't, sometimes they can secure a work permit. But that's kind of the process of how people apply for asylum. Uniquely, because I work with Central Americans, many of them are coming through not on airplanes, they're coming at the border, the Mexico-US border. Other countries, in Africa, Asia, Europe, they would probably come in on an airplane and then seek asylum that way.
Well, okay, so can you give me and all of us like an example of like what is the danger that LGBTQ people, queer people face in Honduras? Like for instance, I mean, I'll just be honest, is that it's like I certainly understand that, as a country, and I was always taught it's like, we're a land of immigrants, and I've lived all over the country. I've lived in New York City, San Francisco, you know, uh, I am a firm believer and with the ideology of the melting pot and all of this stuff. Um, all that being said, until the last probably decade or so, I haven't given a lot of attention, paid a lot of attention myself uh, to immigration. It's just part of what the government does and part of
Sure, sure,
and
right.
and now it's become a daily conversation every single day. So I guess for those of us who maybe there's others like me who haven't given it much thought through the years, other than it's just kind of part of the American experience,
Right, right.
Um, what are some of the reasons that, people in Honduras, need to come to the United States, need to seek asylum?
Sure. Yeah, so my first year in Honduras was about 20 years ago, 2006, and I was an out LGBTQ person looking for community, and I joined an LGBT group there, like a kind of a support group. I didn't speak much Spanish at the time, embarrassingly enough, but I met a lot of people who were, working for LGBTQ rights and things. Of course, there's no legal way to get married. There's very few protections, and then socially or culturally in some places like the United States where LGBTQ people are not accepted by family or by
Right.
communities. And so, the for a long time, for maybe around that decade, 2006 to 2018, 2019. Honduras had the highest murder rate for LGBTQ people in the Western Hemisphere, I think, along with Haiti. And worldwide, it was also quite high. And then that just kind of followed because Honduras had the highest murder rate in the world for about a decade outside of a war-torn country, right?
Okay.
This is why we have had all of those migrant caravans and all of the children who are coming and things like that. It all kind of fits together. So it's not simply that Honduras is dangerous for LGBTQ people, although it is. It's, Honduras can be dangerous for a lot of marginalized people. And so some of the dangers, as I said, are violence. Many, for example, trans women are forced into sex work or do sex work to survive, and then there's a lot of danger in that, robbing and assault up into to murder. While I was there, I carry a lot of privilege as I outwardly appear as a white person. I have a little bit of maybe masculine privilege. People often want to, practice their English with me and things like that.
Yeah.
But I was detained at a gay bar with a bunch of my LGBTQ friends. This would have been in 2006, my first year there. And we were detained and I didn't speak much English or Spanish, I'm sorry. And the police were saying that they were going to tow my car unless I, paid them some money. And I finally was like, I'm not paying you money. This is a bribe, whatever. And they grabbed a friend of mine, a gay man, and they just started beating him in front of me until I was like, okay. And they threw him in the back of their truck and they said, follow me, and so I got in my car and I followed the police car and they're kicking him and he's crying and he's in the back of their truck. And they drove around and they took me to an ATM and they said, how much is your friend's life worth?
Wow.
So I got some money out and I paid him off. And then this was it was like a holiday party. I think it was like the 30th of December, the 23rd of December or something. Anyway, there was kind of a quick introduction to how dangerous it can be. And this was, in front of me where I have pretty quick access to the US Embassy, to, resources, things like that. And I learned over the years, the couple decades that, I mean, that was kind of a minor thing compared to what so many of my friends and colleagues face while they're there on a daily basis. And so it's kind of just it's multi, it's dynamic, the danger. It's murder, it's lack of job security, it's lack of health care, it's lack of family support.
Right. So it's just it's very open hate and extortion
Right,
and violence
right,
and acceptable open hate,
right.
extortion, violence, right? I mean, is that fair?
Yeah,
Whereas like
and the example I gave was technically the government, government agents, I guess, police that
yeah.
were detaining me. But if I were to argue that in an asylum case, I would say it was actually there's not like official laws on the books that say, homosexuality is punishable by death or anything like that. But the state is unwilling to protect LGBTQ people in the ways that they should be. And so that's kind of an example of, I mean, it was individual police officers who were harassing or detaining us, but it's really the fact that there's no recourse when that happens.
Well, and it's really, when you say it's like there's nothing illegal, about being LGBTQ, but that's where, but if the social norm makes it okay to openly hate and extort and discriminate and beat up and LGBTQ people, queer people, and if the culture has accepted that in society, it's like well, it's all connected because I
Right.
think that one of the things that I think that or I like to think maybe a lot of people have opened their eyes to over the last maybe decade or so in the United States is how all of the political and cultural and social things are connected in a way that perhaps many have thought aren't connected,
Right.
right? And I
Right.
think that that's too something that uh, is something that's very confusing for people right now
Yeah,
because it's all so much more intertwined and connected than I think what anybody what people would imagine, I
for sure.
suppose. right?
Absolutely.
And, I mean, bursting through is really founded on, in connection and this belief that we are all connected, right? And what happens to one of us affects, another. And, it's things like this where it's like, well, wow. I mean, because when you tell a story about like openly happened to you in Honduras, it's like, I mean, those are things that, you know, I certainly have had some experiences, and I'm sure you have in the United States, but you know, nothing to that degree, and nothing that wouldn't cause that would cause some outrage if
Right.
sold.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, in Honduras to some extent I do as well, but especially in the United States, up until maybe more recently, I feel like I have recourse for when those types of things happen. There's people I can go to, there's places I can publish it. And in Honduras, I have that, like I said, to some degree because of the privileges that I carry. But, a Honduran trans woman or a member of the LGBT community, lesbians, I think, are quite marginalized because they don't have access to the wages that men, usually make if they've given up men in their lives. So yeah, it's like a really multifaceted issue. It's the violence, but it's also lack of access to jobs, lack of access to resources. Honduras has a pretty high HIV positive rate, also with Haiti. I think in the Western Hemisphere, it's at the top. And so medical care, and of course, USAID has just cut funding, a lot of that, which a lot of the HIV meds came from in Honduras. And so it is a really multifaceted issue that, I mean, it's hard to say that one particular thing is dangerous. When people are applying for asylum, they usually write a declaration of their claims, and then I go through and kind of analyze whether, that's something that is caused by the state or neglected by the state, or whether that's typical to my knowledge of what happens. And it can be so multifaceted because, I mean, in the same ways, I think sometimes it is in the United States to different
Right.
degrees.
Right. All right. So kind of, flowing from that, it's like, so bursting through is about active allyship in all forms. So what kind of active allyship do LGBTQ Honduran immigrants need from us?
Yeah, see, I would say, start out by thinking, I guess, intersectionally, meaning like how can we support all immigrants, right? Because
Yeah.
some people come to the United States and they've, like I've done expert witness testimony for someone who said they were not LGBTQ, but they were an effeminate appearing man. And so
Yeah.
they were being discriminated at, and harassed and beat up because of their gender expression, I guess.
Right.
And so they may not have identified as LGBTQ, but they were being discriminated as if they were part of that community. So having, I think a pretty broad conception of how do we support LGBTQ people? Well, how do we support all marginalized, people of genders and sexualities? And then I would say in the United States, thinking about how do we support all immigrants in the same types of ways we support LGBTQ, but we also need to, support women who are victims of intimate partner violence, HIV positive people, and things like that. And I'm especially worried about like the trans community being left behind. And I think you probably saw like on the Stonewall Monument last week, Trump removed trans people. I just think that even with the Democratic Party, who we would think is more LGBTQ friendly, there's not a lot of support for trans women in certain spaces and things like that. So educating yourself about that and learning about the specific issues. I heard a really good quote the other day when you're speaking with people who agree with you. They said, like, I know I'm preaching to the choir, so probably don't need to say this. And then someone said, no, you do need to say it because we're not all singing the same verse here. Like some
Yeah.
people don't know how to talk about it, right? Like, yeah, maybe I have family members that would be, of course I'm LGBTQ friendly, of course I'm immigrant friendly, but they don't understand the nuances. They don't know how to talk about it. And so helping people learn how to talk about it or educating yourself, I think those are kind of the ways I would think about being an ally in that sense.
Yeah, and and again, it's like, I mean, this is what bursting through is rooted in, right? It's like active allyship. And it's because it's like, um, and very much when I, began bursting through there, it was a lot, it was like, okay, there's a lot of love and support, right? And I likened that to, it's like, well, the thoughts and prayer thing that happens every time we have a
Right.
tragedy, and you know, um, and it's like it's kind of, it might at one time it might have been well intentioned, but And it still very well much is well intentioned. It might come from the heart, but it's like it's not enough,
Right.
right? And so that's why it's like I very much like use the active words, and we talk in bursting through about like, okay, well, what are the things that we can do every day? And it's not about like be having like this huge high bar, right? It's
Right.
about like how do you live your values every day? And it's like if you believe in LGBTQ rights, if you believe in immigrant rights, it's like, nobody's saying you have to quit your job and go devote, full time to marching in the
Right.
streets. It's like, but what you can do is that you can speak up for people who are not in rooms. You can openly share your support. You can have the conversations, right? You cannot avoid the difficult conversation, right? There's a difference between a conversation and an argument, and we can have a conversation,
Right.
right? And share knowledge with people. Um, and that's like it's so important. And that's where like, like I said, it's like when I began bursting through and looking at things through the lens of allyship, it's like, well, the love and support is fantastic, but what we need is love and support plus action,
Right.
right? And that
Right.
action is what's missing. And the action somehow we've made too complicated, right?
Right.
And I'm
Right.
saying, like, as a society, as a country, as a culture, we've made, you know, action too complicated because it's just really about how we live our lives every day
Yeah.
and what we
Yeah.
believe in.
And I think that they're even speaking with people that you wouldn't argue with, like
Yeah,
I know a lot of people that say, oh, I believe in LGBTQ rights or I believe in gender equality or, I believe in
yeah,
these things, but they don't often get times to practice talking about it with people that they disagree with on those talking points. Now, I feel like I do all the time. I feel like I get plenty of
right, right.
chances to exercise my chops in arguing and debating. But there's a lot of people that do want to be supportive. They're just not, they're not practiced in it. I work with teachers a lot and they say, "Oh, I want to be supportive, but I'm not sure how to talk about it." And I think those of us who maybe are a little bit more versed in talking about it can allow people the grace to learn how to
Yeah,
talk about it. And to help them find the language or understand what the argument is. I mean, we've all been there, right? Like there was a
yeah,
time in my life where I thought, like, oh, I'm going to support LGBTQ people, but I'm not going to talk about it or
yeah.
whatever. But now I've learned how, and
Yeah.
it's so.
Well, and it's like, and you don't know what you don't know. And, it's like one of the things that, this journey has taught me is that, yeah, I mean, those people who do support us, those people who do identify as allies, a lot of time they have been shamed into silence. A lot of times they don't know what to say. And there's also times they've been shamed into silence. So, when you're talking to an ally, you also sometimes need to give them permission to say, it's like, and this is a huge thing, and this is a huge belief and philosophy of bursting through, where it's like there is no wrong way to be an ally as long as there's love in your heart. And
Right.
bursting through is not out there recruiting people to trying to make people allies. It's just saying if you identify as an ally, let's have a conversation, right? And let's get you more engaged.
Yeah. If
And
you want to be helpful, then
yeah, let's
yeah, ideally that you also want to learn more about the issues
yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah, okay. So again, flowing from that, it's like so the current. I think we talked about this a little bit, but the current political and cultural climate in the United States is pretty openly hostile to the LGBTQ community right now. Um, so what have you learned about the dangers of being LGBTQ in Honduras that we can learn from during this strange, challenging, difficult, dangerous, kind of scary time in the United
Yeah.
States?
Yeah, and in so many ways, I think there's parallels to, I mean, I'm sure other countries, but I'll just say Honduras and the United
Yeah,
States and being in a marginalized community. Again, in the United States, I carry a lot of privilege as well as an
right.
educated person, as a white person, and so a lot of the dangers that are present in Honduras can be present for Black and brown LGBTQ people in the United States or poor marginalized people.
Yeah,
So I guess some of the things I've learned, I think Hondurans and Central Americans, more generally, are pretty good at organizing because they've been under. Um, I mean, if you look up the history of wars in Central America we could say through the last century, we could say through the last few decades, and there's a lot of indigenous organizing, Afro-Latino organizing. There's different, journalists and people that are organizing, and the LGBT groups too. I feel like in ways that don't really exist in the United States. Maybe did, when Stonewall was a riot before we had parades, right? When we had marches before we had parades. I've learned that so many Hondurans, I mean, they are willing to risk their lives for these fights. Where I think, and I will be just as guilty as the next person. Where what exactly am I risking here if I am speaking out? If I am going to a parade or a pride march or whatever, and what am I willing to risk? Right? Like, am I willing to risk my job? Am I willing to risk my life, for example? And I think Hondurans, maybe because the situation is more dire, but like they put things on the line. They're also really good at working with different groups, at pointing out the problems. I think LGBTQ people have become quite the scapegoat in the United States, and I think LGBTQ people in Honduras have known for a long time that they're the scapegoat and can point that out a little bit quicker than we are able to here. Where like for example, I don't believe that gender and sexuality are like causing problems in the United States. I believe maybe climate change is, and I believe maybe the taking away of rights of brown and black people and poor people and voter registrations and things like that are. But gender becomes kind of a scapegoat for that. We're constantly talking about um, trans women in sport, in girls' sports, and we're talking about the family and whether gay men should be around children and things like that that are like verifiably not issues, but we're ignoring all of these other things. So I feel like in Honduras, I learned a lot about like nailing down exactly what is the issue, and what they're using as scapegoats.
Yeah. Well, I think too, it's like I think the organization thing that you point out is really interesting because it's like, when I got into the grassroots organization gay or having, creating a grassroots movement, right? It's like it taught me a lot. And, it's like I think, we have become so reliant on like these huge organizations. Uh, to think they're going to do all the heavy lifting or they're going to do this. And it's like, that's not really the way that it
Right.
works. And it's like, and we've lost, and I think that sometimes the queer community in the United States has lost sight of, community connection because community has turned into meaning something larger,
Right.
like, more national
Right,
than
right. Yeah, we
next
can't
door.
wait. We can't wait for the human rights campaign to like solve all of our problems.
Right, right, because that's
And
just not their function.
right, right. And we need like a multi-fronted, struggle, I guess you would call it. But like the HRC should do their work, and then, people in these other spaces should do the more local work. And
Right.
ideally, there'll be kind of a goal together at the end. But you're
Yeah.
right. Like I think in those smaller spaces, sometimes that gets overlooked, or sometimes we become complacent and don't participate in that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we've just got a little bit of time left, but I want to get to this last question. So what are three things? This is kind of a signature bursting through question. So what are the three things allies, members of the community, and all of us need to know about supporting LGBTQ immigrants that we don't?
Sure. Well, the one thing I've been seeing in the news, so like I said, I live in Philadelphia, and I know this is happening in New York City, is there's these rapid response things to ICE. Now, this would be more applicable to all immigrants, not just LGBTQ
Yeah.
immigrants, but and it's probably happening, I know it's happening in many cities. I'm just specifically saw it in Philly and in New York. But, there's training, and then there's notifications that ICE is here and you're going and you're kind of following ICE around and documenting and just publicizing it, because right now it's kind of hard to get news when they're arresting people unless it's coming, or detaining people unless it's coming from, organizers and people on the ground and family members and protesters. And the other thing that I think is something that I'm always working on and trying to figure out kind of the ethics of, I think there's so much, and this is not like institutionalized segregation, but like how many LGBTQ immigrants do we know and do we interact with? How many immigrants do we interact with? How many
Right.
LGBTQ, how many people outside of our community do we interact with? Do you interact with people that speak a different language? Do you interact with people that, have HIV? Or HIV positive? Do you interact with people who need, that are sex workers or things like that? And I think, in my life, I think that that's actually a really difficult bridge to kind of cross. Like I know many people that are proud LGBTQ supporters or proud immigrant supporters, but do they know? Do they know these communities? And I'm not saying they know one because, you know, their neighbor is or their cousin is or whatever, but
No.
like how can you authentically or genuinely learn from these communities, and you're not just interacting, you're interacting with them in, you know, I hate to say that we would have to orchestrate these authentic ways, but that aren't just I'm running into them at the store or, you know, it's someone I meet in the street, but like I know these people. One of the best campaigns, I don't know if you remember this in Iowa, was when one Iowa was going for gay marriage in Iowa, they sent out I thought they were going to be asking me for money, but they said, we don't want your money. We want you to tell 5 people that you're gay. And that was
Yeah.
it. And I was like, what? This is brilliant. And I thought, like, what a way to, you know, I'm not just your cousin. I'm also, you know, part of this community. And then they start picking, you know, other people start saying, oh, I actually do know a lot of these people and they're proud about it. And I'm learning from them. And so I wish that there was ways that we could think of to do that better with LGBTQ and immigrant and LGBTQ immigrant
Yeah.
populations.
Yeah. Well, it really comes down to, and I think this is what you're saying, it's like we need to be intentional
Right.
and purposeful, right? And it's like, and that doesn't mean these are words that have somehow taken on a bad meaning, right, over time, where it's like, well, no, it's like to intentionally learn about, the immigrant experience in the United States as it is in 2025 or 2000 and 2020s or what, whatever, it's like I
Right.
don't know how to say that exactly right. But it's like to intentionally learn about that because it's important. um, it's important. And if you're going to, offer love and support to somebody, it's like we need to learn about them and what
Right.
kind of love and support they actually need,
Right.
which,
And
is
will
kind of
allow them to still be who they are,
who they
right?
are,
Right.
right? Yeah, and it's really just when you boil it down, it's so simple, right? I mean, doesn't it really come down to it's like be who you are, love others for who they are, and I know that that is super complex, but it's also really simple. And
Yeah.
so I want to thank you so much for being part of the Bursting Through experience and for being Bursting Through storyteller.
Thank
And I just have learned so much from you, and I am going to be processing, I think, for a long time. And I think our listeners are too, and everybody who is going to be exposed to all the great information you gave us. So,
Well,
with that,
I'm so appreciative for the chance to talk with you and to
oh, and I would
meet
love to
you. And
let's pick this up again another time. I think we
I
have
would
some
love to. Yeah, I've got
follow-up
lots of
conversations.
opinions. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would love to just have another conversation where we talk about allyship outside of the lens that, we asked you to
sure,
talk about today, right?
sure, sure. Yeah, I would
Um,
love to too. Thank you.
all right, so we'll do it again. So thanks, Kate, and thanks to everybody who's been listening. You've been listening to Bursting Through. If this conversation moved you, share it because our conversations are just the beginning. What really matters is how our actions create change. Remember, allyship is not a moment, it's a movement. Together, we are bursting through.